All right, we left off on chapter 20, and we saw a chapter like this a while ago, but this is, if you can see, like the text over here is how most of the text of the book looks, and the text of this chapter is italics. So I don't know if it's supposed to be somebody's thoughts, but I'm guessing that it connects to the chapter we read earlier, which was also in all italics. And to be honest, for me, it was a little bit confusing. It's not really clear to me what's going on in these chapters. I'm assuming that we'll find out later. Chapter 20, in weird italics. How could this be happening to him? His breath could snap trees. His strength could hold up the earth. He was the black tortoise of winter. The heavens and the sea honored him. He, the indestructible, the mighty. But he felt the force on his back from the enormous, what was it? What was pinning him down, pressing on him with so much weight that he could not move? What could be so heavy that he, the great black tortoise, the strongest of all beasts, could not lift it? His limbs struck outward, tearing into nothingness. He craned his neck and snapped at the unseen object, his breath creating a crackling of ice on his shell. He tried again to rise, but his arms and legs only sank into a slippery smoothness, like a deep silk pillow swallowing his limbs. Who would dare to do this to him? Who would dare insult him this way? Who would be this foolish, this arrogant, this devious, this mad? Not a beast, not an immortal. Only a human could do this. Did this human not know that the black tortoise was forever? Oh, how he would make this human pay. For all eternity, this human would regret making the black tortoise of winter feel so helpless. Chapter 21. Anybody else feeling a little confused about what's going on in those chapters? I'm hoping we find out later. Chapter 21. Bai Ma galloped through the gates of the city of bright moonlight. With Lady Meng as a companion, they had easily found shelter for the evening, and they had been riding most of the day. The wind and snow had howled around them, whipping the trees as well as their faces. So even Bai Ma was eager when the city began to swell in the distance. The grand palace rose above the rest of the city like a mountain, the thick snow lying on its tiered roofs like heavy clouds. With a triumphant yell from Yishan, Bai Ma had flown toward the city. The stone lions that flanked either side of the gates were wearing wigs and beards of snow, and they grinned as the horse passed through. The lions were the only ones with smiles, however, as all the other inhabitants of the city just stared at them, either with awe or horror. Pinmai was not sure which. And here they are riding into the city gate. See him on the horse. Almost wordlessly, people jumped out of their way, and Lady Meng did not even have to slow the horse. The common stone houses and the white snow were a gray blur, and Bai Ma's hooves on the black brick road made a metallic noise, almost like the clinking of coins. You know that sound that a horse's hooves make? That like, I'm hearing that as they gallop into the city. Ahead, Pinmai saw a dull crimson barrier that stretched for miles. That's the wall around the palace grounds, Pinmai thought, remembering Ama's stories. That's the inner city, and everything else is the outer city. It's supposed to be like a city inside a city. A walled city for the king of bright moonlight, the vast wall for the emperor, Yishan said in a mocking tone. Rulers love walls, don't they? That hits a little close to home, doesn't it? Halt! A voice, harsh and commanding, rang out above the sound of Baima's striking hooves. Lady Meng pulled the horse to a stop, and Pin Mai turned to see two guards on either side of the gate of the inner city, neither of whom she'd noticed before. I am here to see the king, Lady Meng said, with the aristocratic dignity of an empress. From the corner of her eye, Pin Mai saw Lady Meng nudge Yishan with her elbow, a warning for silence. The king is not seeing anyone, the guard said. Even though he was supposed to be the king's guard, his helmet had the emblem of the emperor, the face of a snarling tiger, the metal already turning green. He will see me, Lady Meng said. She pushed down the hood of her cloak and looked directly at him, letting the full force of her beauty and rank pour upon him like a waterfall. Indeed, the guard looked dazed and overwhelmed, and Pin Mai suddenly realized how even a hero who would not be stopped by the fear of turning into ice could be slowed by a beautiful woman. Well, maybe, the guard began to stammer. We aren't supposed to let anyone into the inner city, the other guard cut in. Lady Meng shifted her gaze, tossing her hair so it made a black cloud above them. Tiny jewels of snow sparkled around her. I am not anyone, she said with regal authority. No, yes, the second guard said, equally bewildered by Lady Meng. I mean, it's just that the king would be angered that I was delayed in such a vulgar way, Lady Meng said, her voice the hypnotic sound of ocean waves. Don't you think you'd better let me through? The guards looked at each other, confused. Like a flying arrow, a small dark blur darted towards the guards. It was the swallow. It pecked at their helmets, twittering and flapping. Pin Mai gave a small shriek of surprise, but the sound was lost as the guards yelped and clattered, waving their arms like crabs about to be dropped in a pot. Lady Meng did not hesitate. With a quick command, Bai Ma jumped through the gates and galloped in to the inner city. Chapter 22. Yishan's laughter echoed across the empty courtyard. Pin Mai craned her neck to see if the guards would follow them, but all she saw was a mist of snow. Perhaps the guard would think that they were just a dream. When they passed a second courtyard, Bai Ma slowed and Lady Meng looked up into the sky. Yishan and Pin Mai followed her gaze until they finally saw what she was looking for. A small black dot circled above them. Thank you, Lady Meng said to the swallow. Now, the king, please. So the swallow led them to another empty courtyard, then over an arched stone bridge of the same color as the frozen water beneath. Bai Ma's steps made a hollow, mournful echo, and when the swallow stopped in front of a red carved door, they heard the unmistakable sound of weeping. Lady Meng hesitated, but then pushed open the door. They were in the throne room. Even though they were out of the wind, the room did not feel a whole lot warmer, and Pin Mai was surprised by its starkness. The row of windows cast a cold, white light, making everything within look like a shadow puppet. A tearful queen was being led out of the room by frozen-faced women, and the king sat stiffly on his throne, his eyes fixed on a paper clutched in his hands. But the creaking of the door forced the king to look up, and when he saw his visitors, his face lit with surprised recognition, melting his stiffness. "Meng Hai!" the king said, standing and reaching to pull Lady Meng up from her low bow. "What are you doing here?" "Kai Jai," Lady Meng said, grasping his arms in greeting. She glanced at the floating silk swirls of the departing women. "Why is the queen upset?" "Oh, we have just received very bad news. The emperor has conscripted the men of a village north of here, and we," the king hesitated and glanced around warily, "and we have friends there." Those must be some close friends, Pinmai thought. She felt she shouldn't be listening to their conversation, but how else would they know when to ask about the dragon's pearl? She bit her lip and looked at Yishan. He, like her, had kneeled in a bowing position, and then he shrugged at her. They were unnoticed and forgotten, but this was not the time to interrupt. "But it matters not," the king continued, shaking his head as if to clear it. His face took on an expression of alarm. "You must not be here. Meng Hai, you must leave right away." "Leave?" Lady Meng said. "I cannot leave until I know what happened to Wan. Tell me, how did he die?" "Oh, he's dead?" the king gasped. "I thought the emperor took him to work on the vast wall." "The vast wall?" It was Lady Meng's turn to gasp. "Why was Wan working on the wall?" "Oh, you did not get my message?" the king said. Lady Meng shook her head. The king looked around again at the room, empty except all of them, and beckoned her closer. "Your husband was right about that meeting of kings. He said the Tiger King could not be trusted, and he insisted on going in my place," the king said in a fierce whisper. "The meeting was a trap. All the other kings were killed. The Tiger King made all his men the new kings, killed the old emperor, and then made himself the new emperor, the ruler of all." "But what about Wan?" Lady Meng pressed. "Wan, he was not killed," the king said. "For some reason, when the king reached Wan, the Tiger King dropped his sword, grabbed your husband by the collar, and ripped his shirt. Then the Tiger King held a piece of his shirt in his hand, laughed, threw Wan to the ground, and told his men to take him away." "Ripped his shirt," Lady Meng whispered, and Pinmai thought about the dragon shirt that Lady Meng had sewn. It had failed to protect her husband. "And then, not long after, he became invincible," the king said, scowling. "The Tiger King had always been a fierce warrior, but suddenly swords bounced off of him and he could toss trees." "And boys," Yishan added grimly to Pinmai. She grimaced. Was Ama with this emperor now? A man who didn't sound like a man at all? Pinmai swallowed and pressed her hand over Ama's bracelet as if she were hiding it. "Now that he is emperor, the mountains bleed red where he has whipped them to make room for his vast wall," the king continued, either not hearing Yishan or just ignoring him. "And men like your husband toil for him there night and day." "Well, then I must go to the vast wall," Lady Meng said without hesitation. "I will find him alive or dead." "Wherever you go," the king said, "you and your friends, you must go immediately. It's not safe here, Meng Hai." "But we just got here," Yishan said, lifting his head with indignation. Pinmai frowned in agreement. They still needed to ask about the dragon's pearl. The king looked directly at them for the first time, and Pinmai's protests were temporarily forgotten in her surprise. The king's face was white and gaunt, and the deep shadows of his eyes looked as if they had been painted with smoke. He looked more like a ghost than a king. You don't understand, he said. This is no place for children or friends. The emperor and the door to the throne room burst open, and with a biting gust of cold air, a servant flew to stand before the king. The emperor is here, the servant girl gasped. Chapter 23. I wonder if that's the king or the emperor. How close is he? The king demanded. He just arrived at the gate, the servant girl said, breathing heavily. Probably coming through the first courtyard right now. Quickly, Yenna, the king said to the girl. Take Lady Meng and these children to the Hall of Distant Clouds before the emperor or his men see them. They are friends and they must stay out of sight until after. Yenna, who didn't seem much older than Pinmai, nodded with the shrewdness of an adult. Pinmai glanced back and forth between the king and Yenna, feeling like a mouse lost in the snow. But when the others rose in unison, she followed quickly, and the king led them to a door at the back of the room. Bring them through the long walkway. The emperor will take the other path, the king said to the girl. He turned to Lady Meng and the children. Yenna will see that you are comfortable and well taken care of. I will send word when it's safe for you to leave. Please, go quickly. And Yenna, the king called as they turned to leave, make sure you warn them about the western side of the walkway. She nodded and pushed them through the doorway. They rushed through the halls of the palace, Lady Meng's robes flowing behind her like silken water, to another door. And then, to Pinmai's surprise, Yenna led them outside to a covered, meandering corridor. In warm weather, the richly decorated pathway was probably a delightful way to take a relaxed stroll through the garden. But now, with the biting wind and the endless landscape of white, the walkway's bends and length were more of an annoyance, and the fleeing group kept slipping on its curves. Pinmai's thoughts twisted and turned like their running steps. The emperor here? The emperor here? And if the emperor was here, was Ama here too? So what did the king mean when he said to warn us about the walkway? Yishan said, huffing to keep up with Yenna's fast pace. Something about the western side? Yenna slowed and then looked behind them, the covered pathway stretching beyond them like a dragon's backbone. I think we're far enough now, she said, stopping. And you probably should know as soon as possible because it's really important. Lady Meng gave a grateful sigh, glad to rest. But Pinmai and Yishan looked at Yenna curiously. Right now, we're on the long walkway, Yenna said, speaking as if they were very young children. This walkway divides the palace garden in half, in kind of a twisty way, of course, but still into two pieces. Yeah, I think that's pretty obvious, Yishan said. Even though he was breathing heavily, his mocking tone was pretty clear. So Pinmai nudged him. This is the eastern side, Yenna said, ignoring Yishan and motioning toward the left. She waved to her right. And this is the western side. Pinmai looked back and forth at both sides of the walkway. There did not seem to be a big difference between the two sides. So, Yishan said, while the emperor is here, you are never to go on the western side of the long walkway, Yenna said, raising her voice for emphasis. You must never, ever cross the walkway to the western side. Why? Yishan asked. What'll happen? What if we do? If you do, you're dead, Yenna snorted. The Emperor declared he'll kill anyone and their family if they're found on the western side while he's here. So don't cross the walkway. Got it? Pinmai looked again at the western side of the walkway. It was blanketed with thick snow, iced over, and glittering like a diamond, but she still did not see anything unusual about it. No, I don't understand, Lady Meng said, her lovely face frowning in confusion. The western side, the eastern side, why is it important? It's important to the Emperor, Yenna said, turning to lead them farther. And while he's here, that's all that matters. And that's where we stop for today.